Quilting with arcs and curves and pointy rulers is a perfect way to create some pretty amazing designs. Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, your favorite ruler quilting ninja from quiltingismytherapy.com, and welcome to the final video in the Arcs, Curves, and Points with Rulers Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. Throughout this free video series, we've been learning how to quilt some pretty amazing designs using arced, curved, and pointy rulers. And in this video, we're going to learn how to combine all our rulers to create some pretty amazing, complex-looking designs that are actually pretty easy to quilt. It's a perfect way to use our rulers in as many ways as possible. So let's get to it. So far in this video series, we've learned how to use rulers to create different block designs. But now we're going to go outside the block and learn how we can use those rulers to fill in negative spaces or background areas of our quilts. While every quilt top is different, there are some techniques that you might find helpful. So in this video, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to go about it. When it comes to looking at background areas of our quilts or those negative spaces in between blocks, it can be a little daunting to know how to use our rulers in those areas. Instead of focusing on the whole background area, I prefer to break it up into more manageable chunks by using the quilting to build off of other parts of the quilt, whether it's the blocks or previously quilted designs. And like I said, while every quilt top is different, I tend to approach these areas the same way. First, I'll pick a strategy. Before picking the quilting design I'm going to use in these areas, I like to decide my strategy for approaching them. And when it comes to these areas, there's two strategies I tend to use the most often. For strategy number one, I ask myself, are there any points or areas on the quilt top that I can connect with the quilting? This is my favorite way to create background designs. These points that I'm looking for can be parts of the quilt block, it could be seams in the piecing, or maybe even previously quilted lines. Since the points are already on the quilt, I don't have to take the time to mark out the design before I start quilting. But a second benefit to this technique is that if all the lines are coming to certain points of my quilt, it's really going to show off those areas and draw attention to them. On our quilt panel, we're going to be using our arcs, curves, and pointy rulers to create the designs. But this technique is something that you can do with other types of free motion quilting as well. Sometimes though, that doesn't work out, so I aim for strategy number two. Are there repeating areas on the quilt where I can quilt designs in the background area? Because the truth of the matter is sometimes there's not any points that I can connect on the quilt with my quilting. So instead, I'll look to the quilt for these repeating areas that I can fill in with my rulers. It could be a spot in between quilt blocks or maybe a space in between blocks in the border. It just needs to be something that's in repeatable areas around the quilt. For instance, this area in between the outer curves of my panel is perfect for filling in. It not only gives me a nice big space to quilt my design, but it repeats around the whole panel. Now, once you've narrowed down that repeatable area, then it's time to pick a design that's going to fill it in. And this is where it becomes fun because it could be a single larger design or several smaller designs to fill it in. The trick here is to use your imagination and have fun with it. And honestly, there's no reason that I need to stick with just one strategy. I can mix and match the two to create even more design options. Now, once I have a strategy on how I'm going to approach the quilt, I'll start imagining what kind of different designs I can make with my rulers. Even if the design that I want to pick doesn't fill in that area perfectly, that doesn't mean that it won't work. You can always use echoing and filler designs to fill in any remaining areas. Now, once you have a plan, it's time for step 3 and begin quilting. Building up the design as you go, and stopping when you think it looks good and moving on. But the thing to remember is that you don't have to have the whole design planned before you start. Instead, I kind of like to wing it. I'll quilt the first part of the design and then pause and kind of see how it's looking and then decide where to build up from there. Sometimes I'll keep going, adding more and more to the designs. Or sometimes I'll say, you know what, this is good enough, and use filler in the rest of the area. I know I say it a lot, but it's so true. There is no wrong way to go about doing this. Now, let's see how to use these strategies to create two different design ideas for the background areas of our quilt panel. For the first option, we're going to combine partial motifs, echo lines, and other shapes to create designs that build off the center of our panel. Once I discovered the areas that I wanted to fill in, I realized a partial motif using the dot ruler would be perfect for the area. So I'm looking to the point where these blocks come together, and that's where I'm going to quilt my partial motif. So starting from this point, I'm going to position my dot ruler so it extends straight out from that block and so that it's centered between the two sides. Then, holding it in place, I'm going to quilt along the first 3 sides of that ruler. Then, before I go down the last side of the ruler, I'm going to shift it over slightly so that that start point is a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the ruler. That's just going to ensure that my lines come together at the bottom of the shape. And there I have that first curvy, pointy shape that dot makes so beautifully. This will act as the center of my motif, and I'm going to add 2 more shapes by quilting 1 on each side. So starting from the same point, I'm going to position the ruler, except this time I'm going to make sure that it fills in the space between the previous quilted design and the edge of the block. And even if this portion of the ruler overlaps the edge of the block just a bit, it's going to be fine, because remember, the quilted line is actually going to be a 1/4 inch inside of it. That's what makes quilting with cutouts a lot of fun, because you can see exactly where that design is going to fall on your quilt. But once I have it positioned, I'm going to quilt along the first 3 sides, just like I did previously. Now this dot ruler is kind of on the longer side, so as you're quilting, be sure to reposition your hands as necessary to make sure that you have control of the ruler. So there I have the first 3 sides, and just like I did previously, before I quilt that last side of the ruler, I'm going to shift it over just a bit to make sure that the quilting ends right at the starting point. And there I have the first 2 points, and to complete my partial motif, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, quilting that same shape that returns back to the starting point. Now, if you're newer to machine quilting with rulers, you might find working with cutout rulers a little bit easier. Since we're quilting along the inside of the ruler, we have something to grab on both sides of the foot, kind of giving us a little bit more control. And there's my first partial motif. It fills in that area quite nicely, and I'm going to do that again, working my way around the quilt. But since the motif starts and ends at the same point, I'm going to use traveling to help me get to the next area so I can repeat those steps. And now that I reach the next point, I'm going to repeat those steps, quilting my partial motif, and then continuing on throughout the quilt. And even though we're trying to quilt that motif so that all those lines come to the same point, don't stress out if they don't. When we're done and we add all the quilting around it, I promise it won't stand out. Now I've designed the panel so that the blocks run right off the edge of the quilt. So when we get to this area, there's not going to be enough room to add the whole motif, but I'm still going to fit it in as much as I can. So I'm going to position the ruler as normal, make sure it's kind of going the direction it needs to go, and I'm going to quilt along the ruler. Except when I hit the edge of the quilt, of course, I'm just going to travel along that edge to the other side of the ruler and come back to the starting point. It's going to give me that motif that looks as though it's running off the edge and helps give that continuous look to the quilting. Of course, if the idea of doing this makes your head hurt just a little bit, you can totally skip it. And there I have my first section of partial motifs quilted so that they extend out from the center of the quilt. Not only does it help draw attention to the center, it gives it a little bit more fun detail, breaking up that background and making it a little bit more manageable to handle. Now what I love about this technique is that at any point you can say, you know what, I'm done. You can leave it just like this and use filler in the rest of the area to really make them pop out. Or if you want to build up the design a little bit more, add some more detail, you can keep building off the previous quilting. So for instance, looking at those partial motifs, if I wanted to keep going with this idea, I can quilt some curves so they echo around those partial motifs. It'll help separate it from the background filler and really make it look lovely. Not only will this help kind of group those motifs together and make it more of a cohesive unit, but it'll help separate it from the background filler and really help it stand out. And like I've already said, you don't have to have the whole design planned out before you start. Just start with one idea, quilt it, and then decide if you want to keep building off of it or not. So I'm going to use my Shelley ruler to quilt a curve around the center of the motif, and then my Smiley ruler to quilt another curve that goes from one motif to the next. Of course, if you wanted to mark your reference dots to know exactly where those lines should go, you can totally do that. But I'm just going to kind of wing it and use those previously quilted motifs as my guide. So I'm going to position my Shelley ruler so that it's centered on that previously quilted motif and quilt along that curve to the other side. Giving me that pretty kind of scalloped look. Now from here, I'm going to quilt my arc so it swings out and comes back down to the other motif, stopping about a ½ inch or so away from that center. I'm going to angle the ruler so it quilts up about an inch or so away from the motif and then back down to the other side. So as soon as I'm directly across from where those two motifs join, I know it's time to reposition and quilt the other curve until it ends about a ½ inch away from the center. Then move Smiley out of the way and bring Shelley back in and then quilt that curve around the center. Using the previously quilted lines as a guide for my curved lines ensures that it's going to be centered to the actual quilting. I'm telling you, nothing is more frustrating than taking the time to mark everything out only to realize you get 3 steps in and it's all kind of crooked. So while it might seem a little crazy just to kind of wing it and use that previous quilting, sometimes it looks better than you might imagine. This is kind of using both of the strategies that we saw, where we're quilting a design so it extends from the center, but then also connecting points to create our design. After I've quilted my partial motifs and my echoes, I can decide, okay, you know what, now I'm done and I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of the area with a filler design. Now this seems like a lot to keep track of. Instead of having your designs fill certain points, you can just randomly throw shapes in your background area. It's whimsical, it's fun, and it means that you don't have to try to connect the lines. For instance, maybe I want to put a circle just kind of hanging out over here in the background area. It adds some interest, breaks up the area, makes it a little bit more manageable, and gives you a little bit of practice with working with your curved rulers. I'm going to kind of quilt it so that's directly across where those motifs meet, just for fun. And using the Shelley ruler like we've already kind of seen, holding it in place and quilting along it. Switching it to the other side and repeating. Then, just like everything else we've seen, you can make it as complex as you'd like by adding more quilting in the center, or leave it unquilted and move on. And as you work through bigger areas, putting circles in several different spots is a lot of fun. You can strategically place them so they draw attention to the quilt, or place them as random as you'd like. Then, once I'm happy with how it looks, I can quilt the rest of the area with an all-over design to fill it in. You could either quilt all your circles and then add your filler, or you can use the filler quilting to help you transition from one circle to the next. Let me show you what that looks like on a long arm quilting machine. First, I'm going to mark reference dots so that I know exactly where my circles are going. Then I'm going to use the quilting in the rest of the area to help me move from one of the circles to the next. So I'm going to start by quilting that filler, and then stop as I get to that marked reference dot. Then I'm going to pause with the filler design and position my Shelley ruler and quilt along that first curve, stopping at the needle stop on the other side. And then now I can move it to the other side of the foot to quilt the other part of my circle. But I don't like holding it like that, so instead I'm going to use the other side of the curve, positioning it so that the reference lines are lined up with the quilting, and then quilting along it. Now once I have my circle, I'm going to fill inside of it by quilting curves around the inside. Now you can use the Shelley ruler, or for a different curvy look, you can use the Smiley ruler. Now once I've decided I'm done with the circle, I can then resume quilting the filler designs, filling in those unquilted areas around the quilted circle. Now as I'm filling it in, I'm going to use echoing to help me maneuver around the area. I love how the denser filler design can really make that circle and the other quilting really stand out. Now, of course, any design would work great as a filler design. The most important thing is that the whole area is filled in as completely as possible. Now, what I love about this technique is that the design is finished when you say it's done. You can always stop where you're at or keep going. So for instance, I'm going to add another echo line on the inside of my quilting so that's even more dense. But whether you quilt one row of the design and stop, or you go all out and use several different rulers and fillers, this technique is not only going to help you master machine quilting, it's also going to look amazing on your quilts. Now for the second design option, we're going to keep it curvy by using our rulers to connect points on our quilt, creating a design that looks complex and interesting without having to do a lot of marking. And this technique will have different results depending on the quilt you're using it on and the shape of the rulers that you're using, making it a versatile technique that you can use on a lot of different quilts. I'm going to start by quilting a line that curves from the outer point here to the center of the block and onto the other side. But since I'd like to throw in other shapes while I'm at it, I'm going to add some circles using the Shelley ruler. So positioning my ruler so that it's about 1/4 inch away from that outer point and quilting a line that curves to it. Not only do these curved lines make the design look nice and complex, they help me move my way along the quilt. So they're not only beautiful, they're also efficient. Now at this point, I'm going to stop and quilt a circle using my Shelley ruler, and then continue on with my curves. Positioning the ruler and ensuring that that reference line extends directly out from that point, and quilting along that curve. Flipping it to the other side, and finishing it. What I love about this technique is that you never really know what it's going to look like until you're finished. So it's kind of like mystery machine quilting. And I'm going to continue on with that, quilting my curved lines that go from one point to the next, then quilting my circles in between them. And don't worry if the lines don't touch those points exactly, just get them close and move on. Now I designed the Shelley ruler so that the curve is the same on both sides. This means if I want, I can work from the same side of the foot to quilt that whole circle. For instance, after quilting this part of the curve, normally I would move the ruler like this and quilt the other half. But if I don't like reaching behind the foot like that, I can move it around and use this side of the curve. Positioning the reference lines so that they're lined up with the previously quilted line and quilting along that inner curve. This is especially helpful if you're only comfortable quilting from one side of the foot. Once I've worked my way around the quilt, quilting all my curves and circles, I could decide to stop right here, or I could keep going and add even more quilting, which is what I'm going to do. And now I'm going to do the same thing again, quilting more lines that overlap on top of that, except I'm going to quilt them in the opposite direction and throw some different shapes into it. This time I'm going to start at the midpoint of that outer block, and I'm going to quilt a curve that angles away from the center, ending about an inch or so away from the next point. So kind of eyeballing about an inch away from that, positioning my ruler and quilting to that point. Of course, I'm just kind of eyeballing where that line goes, but if it would make you feel more comfortable, you could definitely mark a reference point right there. And because we know I like a lot of quilting, I'm going to stop right here and quilt some arcs that go out to the block and back. Basically just adding some details in between my curves, just to give it a nice kind of petal arc looking shape. And I'm going to keep going, quilting those arcs and quilting those petal shapes. I just love how the design looks so complex, but you're really just building off the previously quilted line, connecting points on your quilt using your rulers. And like we saw with the previous design, you can decide when enough is enough. I could stop right here and quilt a beautiful filler design in the rest of the background area and have that nice complex looking design, or I could keep adding to it, connecting more points and adding more detail, which I think is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you what that looks like on the Longarm quilting machine. So after quilting the first part of the design, I'm going to add some more curved echoes around it. Now, as I quilt the arcs, I'm just eyeballing the spacing between the lines, but of course, you can mark a reference dot if you found that more helpful. Now for an added pop, I've switched up the thread colors. It not only helps you see which part of the design I'm working on right now, it adds a cool effect to the background quilting. Now I'm going to add another ring of quilting by marking reference dots above the previous designs and quilting arcs that extend from the previous quilting out to those dots. Then, when I'm touching the previously quilted line, I'm going to add in a circle using that Shelly ruler. And just for fun, I'm going to fill inside that circle with even more curves. Now, if this sounds like a lot to remember, don't worry. I've put together those free quilting diagrams that will show you how this goes together, so be sure to check those out by clicking the link in the description box below. Then, if you're feeling inspired, fill inside the circle before moving on. I just love how the quilting builds off the previous designs. And if you're like me and you like a lot of quilting, you can fill in the gaps between the lines with more curves and fillers. And once you're happy with how the design looks, you can fill in any of the remaining areas, then stand back and be amazed by your beautiful quilting. But no matter how you choose to fill in the background areas of your quilts, just remember that you can use those rulers to make it as complex or as simple as you'd like. It's totally up to you. Now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me on the custom panel I designed for the video series, go ahead and quilt the rest of the panel with the designs of your choice. Try the designs we've learned in the videos, come up with your own designs, and add as much or as little to the quilting as you'd like. And don't forget to check out that free downloadable PDF with quilting diagrams and tips. It's the perfect way to make sure you're successful with the designs that we're learning. And if you need a little bit more help, a little bit more instruction, check out the expanded resource PDF. For a few extra dollars, you get a ton of designs, more step-by-step illustrations, and even more quilted examples. To learn more about either one of those, just click the link in the description box below, or visit quiltingismytherapy.com. And even though this is the last video in the series, it's not too late for you to quilt along with me on the custom panel I designed for the series. To learn more about it and the exclusive products that go along with it, just click the link in the description box below. In the last 4 videos, we have learned so much, from how to create motifs and block designs, all the way up to how to combine them to create some complex looking background fillers. I hope you've enjoyed this video series a lot, and I cannot wait to see what you do with it. So be sure to post pictures on social media and tag me in it so I can see what beautiful quilting you're up to. And even though this is the last video in this series, I will be back soon with another Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.